The photographer showed me one frame from my granddaughter's wedding, and by morning, I'd canceled everything: the trust, the house I'd promised, the company shares. In that single image, I saw the truth they'd hidden for years: the smirk, the whispered words, the woman beside my granddaughter. They thought I was just the old woman writing checks. They were wrong. Hello, everyone. Today's story was inspired by viewer submission and adapted into a full story just for you. If you'd like to share your own story, the submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's get into it. Let me take you back 8 months to the day my granddaughter Claire sat across from me at my kitchen table and asked me to pay for her wedding. I am 68 years old. My husband died 11 years ago, and most people in my family assumed that when he passed, the money came from him. It didn't. I built the company. I started it out of a rented garage when I was 31, selling industrial packaging supplies to factories that nobody else wanted to drive out to. I worked through two recessions. I signed every contract myself. By the time I sold my majority stake, the business was worth more than most of my relatives will ever understand. My husband was a good man, but he was a school teacher. The fortune was mine. I mention this only because nobody in my family seems to remember it. To them, I am grandma, the woman who brings the good casserole, the one who sits at the end of the table and gets asked twice if she needs help standing up when I walk 3 miles every morning without trouble. So when Claire came to me that afternoon, I was happy, genuinely happy. She was the one grandchild who still called me on Sundays, the one who remembered my birthday without a reminder from her mother. She sat down, folded her hands, and told me she'd met someone. His name was Daniel. They were getting married in the spring. Grandma, she said, I know this is a lot to ask, but the venue, the catering, the dress, Daniel's family can't really contribute, and mom and dad are stretched thin. I didn't know who else to talk to. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. How much do you need? I asked. She told me a number. It was a large number. I didn't blink. I had spent my whole life being careful with money, and the one pleasure that careful saving buys you is the ability to say yes to the people you love without flinching. Consider it done, I said. Her eyes filled with tears, and she came around the table and hugged me, and for a moment I felt like the luckiest woman alive. I want you to remember that feeling because it matters. I did not do this out of obligation. I did it out of love. That is what made what came later so hard to swallow. Over the next few weeks, the plans grew. The venue became a waterfront estate. The guest list climbed past 200. The dress alone cost more than my first car. I paid for all of it. I never once complained, and I never once asked Claire to scale anything back because I told myself this was her day and she deserved to feel like the world was hers. But somewhere in those weeks, I started to notice things. Small things at first. Things I told myself I was imagining. The first time was at a dinner to meet Daniel's mother, a woman named Vivian. She arrived in a coat that probably cost more than the entire catering bill, which struck me as odd for a family that supposedly couldn't contribute. She shook my hand, looked me up and down, and said, Oh, you must be the grandmother who's been so generous. The way she said generous made it sound like a job title, like that was the entirety of who I was to her. I smiled and said it was my pleasure. What else do you say? Then there was the seating. At the rehearsal planning, my daughter, Claire's mother, Susan, went through the table arrangements out loud. Claire and Daniel at the head, the parents flanking them, Vivian beside Susan, and me at table 9 near the back between two cousins I barely speak to. We just thought you'd be more comfortable away from the speakers, Susan said, not looking at me. The noise with your ears. There is nothing wrong with my ears. I hear everything. That has always been my problem. I let it go. I told myself I was being a sensitive old woman, reading insults into ordinary decisions. That is the trap they count on, by the way. They count on you talking yourself out of what you've plainly seen. The clearest moment came about a month before the wedding. I had stopped by Susan's house unannounced to drop off a check for the florist. The front door was open. I stepped into the hallway and heard voices in the kitchen: Susan, Vivian, and Daniel. I heard Vivian say, and after the wedding. You're sure she'll sign it over? And I heard Susan laugh, the easy laugh of someone who has already counted money that isn't hers. She'll do whatever Claire asks, the house, the trust, all of it. Just give it time. I stood in that hallway holding a florist's check, and I felt something in my chest go very still and very cold. I did not confront them. I did not make a sound. I set the check on the side table where they'd find it, and I walked back out to my car, and I sat there for a long time with my hands on the wheel. Here is what I decided in that car. I would say nothing. I would smile, I would pay, and I would go to that wedding. I would watch all of them very carefully. And if what I'd heard was true, if my family had reduced me to a signature and a balance, then I would wait for proof. I didn't have to wait long. The proof came at the wedding itself in a single photograph. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The weeks after that afternoon in Susan's hallway were the strangest of my life. I went on as if nothing had changed. I answered Claire's text about napkin colors. I approved the cake design. I wired money for the open bar without a word. And the whole time I was watching. I want to be honest about something. A part of me hoped I had misheard. Standing in a hallway catching pieces of a conversation, it would be easy to twist innocent words into a conspiracy. Maybe Susan meant something else. Maybe Vivian was talking about a different woman, a different house. I gave them every chance in my mind to be innocent. I am not a paranoid person. I built a company on reading people correctly, and I knew that the worst mistake you can make is to act before you understand the full picture. So I tested them quietly. One evening, I called Susan and told her I'd been thinking about the future. I said that with the wedding coming, maybe it was time I started organizing my affairs. I mentioned casually that I was considering leaving the house to a charitable foundation when I passed. Just thinking out loud, I said. Just an idea. The silence on the other end of the line told me everything. A foundation? Susan said, and her voice had changed. It was tight. Mom, have you talked to anyone about that? You should really talk to the family before you make decisions like that. The house has been in our family. Claire grew up visiting that house. I'm only thinking, I said. Well, don't think too hard, she said, trying to laugh. You always overthink these things. After I hung up, I sat in my study for a long while. The house had not been in the family. I bought that house with my own money 14 years ago, long after Claire was already grown. Susan had visited maybe a dozen times, but in her mind, it was already hers. Or it would be once I'd been managed into signing it away. I did one more test. I called my lawyer, a man named Gerald, who has handled my affairs for over 20 years, and I asked him a question. I asked whether anyone in my family had contacted him recently. Gerald is discreet, but he is loyal to me, and he told me the truth. Yes, he said. Susan had called his office 2 months earlier. She had asked, in general terms, what would be involved in transferring property and a trust to a beneficiary while the owner was still living. She had asked whether an elderly person's mental competence could be a factor in such transfers. That last part stayed with me. Mental competence. My daughter had called my lawyer and asked, in so many words, whether I could be declared incapable of managing my own money. I thanked Gerald and asked him to keep a record of any further contact. Then I sat with what I now knew. This was not a misunderstanding in a hallway. This was a plan. It had steps, it had been in motion for months, and the beautiful wedding I was paying for, was simply the occasion they were building it around. Once Claire was married, once the family was gathered and grateful and emotional, they would begin the work of separating me from everything I owned. I could have stopped it right there. I could have called Claire, told her what I knew, and refused to pay another dime. But I didn't. Here is why. I needed to know about Claire. That was the only question that mattered to me. Susan was my daughter, and her betrayal cut deep. But Susan had always been someone who reached for the easy way. Vivian was a stranger, and strangers will take what you let them take. But Claire was different. Claire was the one I loved without reservation. Claire was the one who called on Sundays. If Claire was part of this, if the granddaughter I adored was sitting in those kitchen conversations, nodding along, waiting to inherit a fortune she planned to help strip from me, then I needed to see it with my own eyes. I would not take it on rumor. I would not condemn her on Susan's word. So I made my decision, and it was the hardest decision of my life. I would go to the wedding. I would pay for all of it, down to the last flower. I would smile and dance and give my toast. And I would watch Claire. I would watch her face, her hands, the way she looked at me, and the way she looked at the others when she thought I wasn't paying attention. If she was innocent, I would protect her from all of them. If she was not, I would protect myself from all of them, Claire included. In the meantime, I did something that turned out to be the most important decision of all, though I didn't know it yet. The wedding planner had hired a photographer, a young man named Marcus, to cover the event. When I met him at the planning session, I noticed two things. He was good at his job, and he was the only person in that whole circus who treated me like a human being instead of a checkbook. He held the door. He asked about my late husband. He remembered the second time we met that I take my coffee black. So when I had the chance, I pulled Marcus aside privately. I told him I wanted to pay him extra separately on top of his fee. I told him I wanted him to photograph everything, not just the stage moments, the in between moments, the faces when people thought no one was looking, the corners of the room where the real things happen. He looked at me for a moment, and I think he understood more than I said. He agreed. I had no idea when I hired him that one of those in between photographs would tear the truth open in a single frame. Hi, everyone. If you're enjoying the story so far, please take a second to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. All right, now let's get back to it. The month before, the wedding moved quickly, and I spent it doing two things at once. On the surface, I was the doting grandmother, present for every fitting and tasting and final decision. Underneath, I was preparing. The first thing I did was meet with Gerald in person. Not at his office, where someone might notice, but at a quiet restaurant outside town. I laid out everything I knew and everything I suspected. He listened without interrupting, the way good lawyers do, and when I finished, he asked me one question. What do you want to have ready? I told him. I wanted documents prepared but not signed. I wanted to understand exactly what I owned, how it was held, and how quickly I could move it if I decided to. The house, the trust I had set up years ago with Claire named as a future beneficiary, my remaining shares from the company's sale, which still paid out and still carried weight. I wanted to know which of these things my family could touch and which they could not, and what it would take to put all of them beyond reach in a single morning if it came to that. Gerald told me it could be done. A trust can be amended or revoked if it is structured the way mine was and mine was. A beneficiary designation can be changed with a signature and a phone call. A house held in my name alone is mine to sell or transfer to anyone I please. The only thing that could stop me, he said, was exactly the thing Susan had been asking about. If someone could convince a court that I was not of sound mind, they could freeze everything and take control as my guardian. So the danger, I said, is that they declare me incompetent before I act. Yes, Gerald said. Which means if you ever decide to move, you move fast and you do it while there is no question about your state of mind. The longer you wait, the more they build their case that you are confused and need protecting. I understood. They were not in a hurry because they thought they had all the time in the world. They thought I was a slow, trusting old woman who would drift into their hands. My advantage was that they had badly underestimated how quickly I could think and act when I chose to. The second thing I did was get my own affairs in order quietly. I gathered statements. I made copies. I wrote down dates and names and the substance of what I'd overheard so that if anyone ever claimed I was confused, I would have a clear record made while my mind was sharp. I even saw my own doctor and asked him plainly to note in my file that I was mentally competent and fully oriented. He gave me a strange look, but he did it. That single piece of paper would matter more than I realized. While I prepared, the family carried on around me, and the small insults kept coming. I had stopped talking myself out of them. Now I simply collected them the way you collect evidence. At the final dress fitting, Vivian was there, uninvited, offering opinions nobody asked for. She turned to me at one point and said, It must be nice to be able to just write a check and not worry about any of the real work. Susan laughed. Claire was in the next room and didn't hear it. I noted that. At the rehearsal dinner planning, Daniel asked me directly in front of everyone whether I had thought about what happens to the house someday. He said it lightly, as if it were a joke, but he watched my face when he said it. And I have spent my life across negotiating tables from men who smile while they take your measure. I knew exactly what he was doing. Through all of it, I watched Claire, and this is the part that kept me up at night. I could not tell. Sometimes Claire seemed entirely separate from the others. She would catch me sitting alone and come sit beside me, take my hand, and tell me how grateful she was. She would say she didn't know what she'd do without me. Those moments felt real. They felt like the granddaughter I knew, but other times I would see her in a corner with Susan and Vivian, the three of them with their heads close together, and Claire's expression would be one I didn't recognize. And once, when I mentioned offhandedly that I might travel after the wedding and be away for several months, I saw something flicker across her face. Worry. Not the worry of a granddaughter who'll miss her grandmother, a different kind. The worry of someone whose timeline has just been disrupted. I didn't know what to make of it. I wanted so badly to believe she was innocent that I knew I could not trust my own judgment. My love for her was the one thing that could blind me, and I knew it. That is why the photographs mattered so much. A camera doesn't love anyone. A camera doesn't talk itself out of what it sees. I needed something outside my own hopeful heart to show me the truth. The night before the wedding, I met Marcus one last time to confirm our arrangement. I handed him an envelope with his extra payment and told him again what I wanted. Capture the real moments, the ones between the poses. He took the envelope, then hesitated. Ma'am, he said, can I ask why? Most people want me to only catch the happy parts. I looked at him for a moment, this kind young man who had no idea what he was walking into. Because the happy parts are for everyone else, I said. I want the true parts. They're for me. He nodded slowly. I think even then he sensed that something was wrong in this family. He had photographed enough weddings to know what love looks like and what performance looks like. The next morning, I put on my best dress, fixed my hair, and went to my granddaughter's wedding, ready to learn the truth, whatever it turned out to be. The wedding was held at the waterfront estate I had paid for, and I will admit it was beautiful. The lawn ran down to the water, white chairs were set in neat rows, and there were flowers everywhere, the exact flowers I had written checks for. 200 guests arrived in their best clothes. A string quartet played. From the outside, it looked like the happiest day of a family's life. I arrived early, as I always do. I wanted to see the day begin before anyone had arranged their faces. The first thing I noticed was that no one had a role for me. At a wedding, the grandmother who paid for everything might expect to be consulted, escorted, given some small place of honor. I was given nothing. When I asked Susan where I should be during the ceremony, she waved a hand and said, "Oh, just find a seat anywhere, Mom. We're all so busy." Then she hurried off to fuss over Vivian, who had arrived in a gown that again cost more than the catering, for a woman whose family supposedly couldn't contribute a cent. I found a seat. Not in the front row where the grandmother belongs. Someone had placed a small reserved card on the front row chairs with other names on them, Daniel's relatives mostly. I sat in the second row off to the side and I said nothing. By now I was past being hurt by it. I was simply observing the way you observe a room full of people who don't know they're being observed. I watched Marcus moving through the crowd with his camera. He was good. He was everywhere and nowhere, and people stopped performing for him after a few minutes because he made himself invisible. Every so often, he would catch my eye across the lawn and give the smallest nod. He was working, he was capturing the true parts, just as I'd asked. The ceremony itself was lovely. Claire came down the aisle and she was radiant, and for those few minutes, I forgot all of it. I forgot the hallway and the phone calls and Gerald's warnings. I just saw my granddaughter, the little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder, getting married. My eyes filled with tears, and they were real tears. Whatever else was true, my love for her was true. Daniel waited at the front, and when she reached him, he took her hands and smiled. I studied that smile. It did not reach his eyes. I have seen that smile in boardrooms. It is the smile of a man who has gotten what he came for. They said their vows. They were pronounced married. Everyone applauded. We moved to the reception under a large white tent, and that is where the day began to show me what I had come to see. At dinner, I was at table 9 near the back between the two cousins, exactly as the seating chart had promised. From there, I had a clear view of the head table, and that turned out to be useful. People at the head of a room forget that the people at the back can see them perfectly well. I watched the dynamics all evening. I watched Vivian and Susan seated near each other, lean in and laugh and touch each other's arms like old conspirators rather than two women who had met only months ago. I watched Daniel work the room, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, and I watched the way his eyes would travel over the guests as if he were calculating the value of each one. And I watched Claire. She spent most of the dinner being a bride, smiling, hugging, posing for photographs. But twice during the meal, she left the head table and went to where Susan and Vivian sat. And the three of them put their heads together, and each time I felt that cold stillness return to my chest. There were toasts. Susan gave one and spoke at length about love and family, and never once mentioned the grandmother who had made the entire day possible. Daniel's best man gave one. Even a college friend gave one. No one asked me to speak. I had funded every inch of that tent, and I was the only close family member not invited to say a word. I understood the message. I was the source of the money, and the source of money is meant to be silent and grateful. Late in the evening, something happened that I did not expect. Marcus came to my table. He crouched beside my chair so we were at eye level, and he spoke very quietly so the cousins couldn't hear. Ma'am, he said, I need to show you something. Not here. Is there somewhere we can step away for a minute? His face had changed. The easy professional warmth was gone. He looked like a man who had seen something he could not unsee and who had decided I needed to see it too. My heart began to beat hard, but my voice was steady. I have learned that the steadier your voice is, the more clearly you can think. Of course, I said. I stood, set my napkin on the table, and followed him out of the tent. We walked a short distance down toward the water, away from the lights and the music, until we reached a quiet spot near the dock where no one would overhear us. Marcus stopped. He turned his camera around so the screen faced me. His hands were not quite steady. I wasn't sure if I should show you this, he said, but you told me you wanted the true parts. And I thought if it were my grandmother, I'd want to know. He pressed a button. An image appeared on the small screen. I leaned in to look, and the music and the lights and the whole beautiful evening fell away. There it was, one frame. And in that single photograph was everything I had spent 8 months trying to learn. I want to describe the photograph exactly because every detail of it mattered. It had been taken earlier in the evening during the dinner from across the room. Marcus had a long lens and he had caught a moment that none of them knew was being recorded. Three people stood close together in a corner near the head table, half turned away from the crowd, thinking they were unseen. Susan, Vivian, and Claire still in her wedding dress. The three of them were looking down at something. Claire was holding it. It took me a moment to understand what it was, and then I did. It was a document, several pages folded back, and I recognized the format of it because I had seen documents like it my whole life. It was legal paperwork. Claire was pointing at a line on the page. Susan was leaning in, and Vivian, the mother of the groom, the woman who had met this family only months ago, was reaching out with a pen. That alone would have been damning. A bride in her wedding dress at her own reception, huddled over legal papers with her mother and her new mother in law, while 200 guests celebrated 20 feet away. People do not do that. There is no innocent reason for a bride to be reviewing documents with a pen during her own wedding. But it was Claire's face that finished me. I knew that face. I had loved that face her whole life. And the expression on it in that photograph was not the worry I had hoped to find, the look of a young woman pressured by others. It was focused. It was eager. She was the one pointing at the page. She was the one directing the moment. Susan and Vivian were leaning toward her, following her lead. Claire was not a victim being pulled into something. Claire was running it. And in the corner of the frame, just visible, was Daniel, standing a few feet away, watching the three women with that same boardroom smile, keeping a lookout while his bride conducted business. I stood at the edge of the water and looked at that photograph for a long time. Marcus did not say anything. He just held the camera steady and let me look. I had spent 8 months telling myself I needed proof before I would condemn my granddaughter. I had refused to act on Susan's words alone, refused to trust the flickers I'd seen on Claire's face, because my love for her demanded that I give her every chance. Now the proof was in front of me, captured by a camera that did not love anyone and could not lie. The granddaughter who called me on Sundays. The one I had defended in my own mind against my own daughter. She was the architect of it. I felt something break, and then I felt it settle. I will tell you honestly that the breaking lasted only a few seconds. I had grieved this possibility for months already. Every night I lay awake wondering. The photograph did not surprise me so much as it confirmed what some part of me had already known and refused to say out loud. Marcus, I said. My voice was calm. Can you tell what those papers are? No, ma'am. But I zoomed in earlier. He pressed a few buttons and the image enlarged. The text was blurry, but at the top of the page I could make out a few words. One of them was a word I knew well, because Gerald and I had discussed it many times. Guardianship. There it was. Not a transfer, not a will, a guardianship petition. The legal document that one person files to take control of another person's affairs by declaring that person unable to manage them. They had not waited for the wedding to be over. They were so confident, so certain that I was a harmless old woman who suspected nothing that they had brought the paperwork to the reception itself. They were going to begin the moment the party ended. Perhaps they intended to have it ready to file first thing in the morning, while the family was still gathered and the story of a sweet, doting, overwhelmed grandmother was fresh in everyone's mind. I understood the whole shape of it now, the seating that pushed me to the back, the constant comments about my ears, my age, my overthinking, the careful, repeated suggestion to 200 witnesses that I was fragile and confused. They had been building a case in front of the entire guest list all evening. Every guest who saw me sitting alone at table 9, looking lost, was a future witness to my supposed decline. It was, I had to admit, a good plan. It was the plan I might have built myself if I were the kind of person who built plans against the people who loved me. I straightened up and stepped back from the camera. Thank you, Marcus, I said. You have no idea what you've done for me. Are you all right, ma'am? He asked. He looked genuinely worried. Do you want me to delete it? Or do you want a copy? I want every copy you can give me, I said. I want that photograph and the zoomed version and every other photograph you took tonight that shows those three together. Can you do that? Yes, I can put it all on a drive for you tonight. Do that. And Marcus, I looked at him directly. Tell no one, not the planner, not the family, no one. As far as anyone knows, you took beautiful pictures of a beautiful wedding. Do you understand? He nodded. I think he understood completely. I turned and looked back at the tent, at the lights and the music and the people dancing, at my family celebrating a wedding I had paid for, while a guardianship petition sat folded in my granddaughter's hand. I was not angry. Anger is loud, and I needed to be quiet. What I felt instead was clarity. They had made their move too early, and they had made it in front of the one camera that was working for me. Now it was my turn. And unlike them, I would not wait. I did not leave the wedding in a hurry. That was important. A confused, fragile old woman might flee a party in tears. A woman in full command of herself finishes her evening with grace and gives no one anything to remember as strange. So I walked back into the tent. I found Susan and told her the day had been beautiful and that I was proud of all of them. I hugged Claire and told her she was the most beautiful bride I had ever seen, and I meant the word beautiful even if I no longer meant the rest. I shook Daniel's hand. I even said a few polite words to Vivian. I made sure that everyone who saw me that night saw a happy, lucid grandmother enjoying her granddaughter's wedding. Every one of those people was a potential witness, and I was now building my own record just as they had been building theirs. Then I said I was tired, which at my age no one questions, and I had a car take me home. It was nearly midnight when I walked into my house. Most women my age, after a day like that, would have gone to bed. I made coffee instead, black, the way Marcus had remembered. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Claire had asked me for the money 8 months earlier, and I began to work. The first thing I did was lay out everything I knew and put it in order. The hallway conversation, Susan's call to Gerald asking about competence, the repeated comments about my mind and my ears in front of witnesses, the flickers on Claire's face, and now the photograph with the word guardianship visible at the top of a document being passed around at the reception. Separately, each piece could be explained away. Together, they formed a clear and deliberate plan to have me declared incompetent so they could take control of my house, my trust, and my remaining shares. I understood now why they had moved the way they had. A guardianship is not like a theft. You cannot simply take an old woman's money. You have to convince a court that she cannot be trusted with it herself. That takes time, and it takes a story, and it takes witnesses who will say she seemed confused, she seemed forgetful, she let other people make her decision. They had spent 8 months assembling that story. The wedding, with its 200 guests, had been the stage where they presented the final act of it. But they had made one enormous mistake. They had assumed that the story was true. They had spent so long telling each other that I was a slow, trusting old woman that they had come to believe it. They had no idea that the slow, trusting old woman had built a company from a rented garage, had sat across from men far more ruthless than Daniel, and had spent the last 2 months quietly preparing for exactly this night. Around 1 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus. He had uploaded everything to a secure drive and sent me the link. I opened it on my laptop. There were dozens of photographs, the three women in the corner, the document, the zoomed image with the word guardianship, Daniel standing guard, Susan and Vivian laughing together like the old partners they apparently were, and a series of images taken throughout the night that told the whole story of how I had been seated, ignored, and managed. Marcus had even caught the moment Susan waved me off when I asked where to sit, and the moment Daniel asked me about the house with that smile. It was, I realized, a complete evidentiary record, better than anything I could have assembled myself. A timeline of a conspiracy, photographed by a professional, time stamped, and now in my sole possession. I sent Marcus a message thanking him and told him I might need him later to confirm when and where the photographs were taken. He wrote back simply, whatever you need. Then I called Gerald. I know it was the middle of the night. Gerald has been my lawyer for over 20 years, and he has grown wealthy on my business. And I did not feel even slightly bad about waking him. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep, and within 30 seconds of hearing my tone, he was fully awake. Gerald knows the difference between a casual call and a serious one. I told him everything: the wedding, the photograph, the word at the top of the document. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something I will not forget. They filed nothing yet? I don't believe so, I said. The papers were in Claire's hand at the reception. My guess is they plan to file in the morning. Then we have tonight, Gerald said. And whoever files first and whoever can prove competence controls the entire story. If they file a guardianship petition before you act, you spend the next year fighting to prove you are not what they claim. If you act first tonight while you are demonstrably of sound mind, there is nothing left for them to take control of, and their petition becomes pointless. A guardian controls assets. If there are no assets in your name for them to reach, there is nothing to guard. This was the heart of it. This was what I had prepared for in those quiet meetings with Gerald over the past 2 months, though I had hoped never to need it. Everything I owned that they were after, I could move. The trust could be revoked. The house could be transferred. The shares could be reassigned. And I could do all of it overnight with my lawyer's help, while every fact of the evening proved I knew exactly what I was doing. Gerald, I said, I want to do it tonight, all of it, before they wake up. Then let's begin, he said. Get your documents. This is going to be a long night, and by the time the sun comes up, there is going to be nothing left for them to take.
I got my documents.
And we began. What followed was the most productive night of my life, and I have had some productive nights. Gerald drove to my house. He arrived a little before 2 in the morning with a briefcase and a laptop and the calm focus of a man who has spent his career doing difficult things on short notice. We set up at my kitchen table, the coffee between us, and we worked until the sky began to lighten. The first thing Gerald did was protect me. Before we touched a single asset, he wanted the record of my competence to be airtight because everything we did that night had to survive any future challenge. He had me sit in front of his laptop and he recorded a video. In it, he asked me the date, the time, the names of everyone in my family, the value of my major holdings, and the reasons I was making the decisions I was about to make. I answered every question clearly. I explained on camera that I had learned my family intended to file for guardianship over me in order to take my property, that I was acting to protect myself, and that I was doing so of my own free will and sound mind. I stated my doctor's recent assessment. I held up the dated note from my physician confirming I was fully competent. When we finished, Gerald nodded. No court in the country would look at that and call you incapacitated, he said. Now let's make sure there's nothing left for them to fight over. We started with the trust. Years earlier, I had set up a trust naming Claire as a future beneficiary. It had been an act of love. I had wanted her to have security when I was gone, and at the time, I could not have imagined her sitting in a wedding dress with a guardianship petition. The trust, as Gerald had told me weeks before, was revocable. That was deliberate. I had built it that way precisely so that I would never lose control of my own money while I was alive. That single decision made years ago for ordinary reasons of caution now saved me. Gerald prepared the documents to revoke the trust entirely. I read every page. I understood every page, and I signed. With one signature, the trust that my family had been counting on simply ceased to exist. The assets inside it returned to me in my own name, free of any beneficiary. Next was the house. The house was held in my name alone. I had bought it with my own money, and despite Susan's belief that it was somehow a family inheritance, it was mine to do with as I pleased. I had thought long and hard about what to do with it. I did not want to simply keep it because as long as it sat in my name, it was a target. The whole purpose of the guardianship plan was to gain control of assets in my name. The cleaner solution was to put it beyond their reach entirely. So I made a decision I had been turning over for weeks. I transferred the house into an irrevocable arrangement that Gerald had prepared, structured so that it could never be reached through any guardianship of me. The details are technical, but the effect was simple. The house was no longer an asset that a guardian could touch. Because it was no longer mine to be guarded, I retained the right to live in it for the rest of my life. But on paper, there was nothing there for anyone to seize. Then the shares. When I sold my majority stake in the company years ago, I had kept a portion. Those remaining shares still paid out and they still carried real value and real voting weight. They had been part of what my family was after. I reassigned the beneficiary designations and restructured how they were held, again in a way Gerald had prepared in advance so that they too were protected. By the time we were halfway through the night, the picture had completely reversed. A guardianship petition only has power if there are assets in the protected person's name for the guardian to control. One by one, I had emptied my own name of everything they wanted. The trust gone, the house beyond reach, the shares restructured. If they walked into a courthouse in the morning and successfully had me declared incompetent, which they could not, they would win control of a person who, on paper, owned almost nothing they could take. But I did not stop at protecting myself. That would have been merely defensive, and I am not a defensive person. I had spent my whole life learning that the best position is the one where you hold the leverage. So I did one more thing. I asked Gerald to prepare a new will and a new estate plan, replacing the old one. In the old plan, Claire and Susan had been provided for generously. In the new one, I directed where everything would ultimately go, and it would not be to the people who had sat in that corner with a pen. I will keep the full details for later in the story because they matter. For now, what mattered was that the future they had planned to inherit no longer existed. The last thing we did as the sun came up was prepare a file. Gerald assembled the photographs, the timeline, the record of Susan's call, asking about my competence, my doctor's note, and the competence video we had recorded that night. He bound it into a single complete package. It was, he said, both a shield and a sword. If they ever tried to file for guardianship, this file would destroy their petition and expose what they had done. And if I ever chose to use it against them in another way, it was ready. Around 6 in the morning, Gerald closed his laptop and looked at me across the table. We were both exhausted. Neither of us had slept. But it was done. It's finished, he said. By the time they wake up, there is nothing left for them to take. And you can prove every bit of why you did it. I looked out the window at the rising sun. My family was still asleep, still dreaming of the morning they would file their papers and begin to take my life apart. They had no idea their plan had died in the night. Gerald left a little after 6. I should have been exhausted, and I was, but I was also wide awake in a way I had not felt in years. I showered, dressed, and made a fresh pot of coffee. Then I sat down to wait, because I knew the phone would start ringing soon. They had a petition to file that morning, and to file it, they would need a few things from me. They would need me to be cooperative. They would need me to be confused. And they were about to discover I was neither. The first call came at 9. It was Susan. Her voice was bright and careful, the voice she uses when she wants something. She said good morning, asked if I had recovered from the big day, and then casually said she wanted to come by that afternoon. There were a few things she wanted to go over with me, she said. Some paperwork, nothing serious, just some forms that would help her take care of me as I got older. There it was. The opening move. Of course, dear, I said in the same warm tone I had used the entire 8 months. Come by whenever you like. I wanted them to come. I wanted all of them to come. Because the most satisfying way to end this was not over the phone. It was in person at my kitchen table where I could watch their faces. I told her to bring Claire and Daniel too, and Vivian if she liked. And I said it would be nice to have the whole family together one more time before the newlyweds left for their honeymoon. Susan, hearing exactly what she wanted to hear, agreed at once. I am sure she thought it was perfect. The whole family gathered, the sweet old grandmother, happy and pliable, the papers ready to sign. They arrived at 2. Susan came first with the folder under her arm. Claire and Daniel came behind her, and Vivian arrived a few minutes later in another expensive coat. They settled in my living room, and Susan made a great show of fussing over me, asking if I was tired, if I was eating, if I was remembering to take care of myself. She was performing the role of the concerned daughter, and I let her because every word of it was being wasted on an audience that already knew the script. After a while, Susan opened the folder. Mom, she said gently, in the voice you use with a child or an invalid, we've all been a little worried about you. You're getting older, and there's so much to manage the house, your accounts, all of it. We think it would be a good idea if someone helped you with all of that just to take the pressure off. I had some papers drawn up that would let me handle things for you. It's really just a formality. She slid the document across the coffee table toward me. I glanced at it. It was, as I expected, a guardianship petition with my name on it as the proposed ward and Susan's as the proposed guardian. The same document I had seen in the photograph, now sitting on my own coffee table. Claire watched me. Daniel watched me. Vivian watched me. The whole room was waiting for the confused old woman to pick up the pen. I did not pick up the pen. Instead, I sat back in my chair, folded my hands, and said, before I sign anything, let me show all of you something first. I reached for the folder I had prepared, the one Gerald and I had assembled at dawn. I took out the photograph. The good one, the zoomed one, the one with the three of them huddled in the corner, and the word guardianship clearly visible at the top of the page in Claire's hand. I laid it on the coffee table next to their petition. The room went silent. I watched the color drain from Susan's face. I watched Claire's mouth open slightly. I watched Daniel's jaw tighten. Vivian, who had the least to lose emotionally and the most experience hiding her reactions, simply went very still. That was taken last night, I said calmly, at the wedding I paid for. While 200 guests were celebrating, the three of you were in a corner reviewing this exact document. I have the full set of photographs. I have a timeline. I have a recording of Susan calling my lawyer 2 months ago to ask whether I could be declared incompetent. And I have a note from my doctor dated last week confirming that I am entirely of sound mind. No one spoke. Susan started to say my name, and I held up my hand, and she stopped. I am not finished, I said. Last night, after the wedding, I did some paperwork of my own. The trust that named Claire as a beneficiary no longer exists. I revoked it. The house is no longer held in a way that anyone could ever take control of, though I will live in it until I die. My shares have been restructured. I have a new will. As of this morning, there is nothing left in my name for a guardian to control. So you are welcome to file that petition. You will spend a great deal of money to be appointed guardian of a woman who, on paper, owns almost nothing. And in the process, you will have to explain that photograph and that timeline to a judge. I watched the understanding settle over them one by one. They had come to my house to take everything, and they were learning in real time that there was nothing left to take and that I had known all along. You underestimated me, I said, every one of you. You spent 8 months telling each other I was a slow, foolish old woman. You said it so often that you believed it. That was your mistake. I built everything you came here to steal. Did you really think I couldn't protect it? Susan finally found her voice, and it came out as barely a whisper. Mom, we can explain. No, I said, you can't, but you can listen. Because there's more, and you're going to want to hear all of it. I let the silence sit for a moment before I went on. I wanted them to feel it. For 8 months, they had controlled the room, the seating, the conversation, the plan. Now they sat on my furniture in my house and waited for me to speak. I have learned that whoever is comfortable with silence controls the room. I was very comfortable. Let me tell you what I know, I said, and then you can decide whether you still want to explain anything. I started with Susan. You called Gerald 2 months ago. You asked him what it would take to transfer my property and my trust to a beneficiary while I was still alive. And you asked him whether my mental competence could be used as a factor. You are my daughter. I raised you. And you called my own lawyer to ask how to have me declared unfit so you could take what's mine. Susan opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I turned to Vivian. You I understand the best, oddly enough. You are a stranger. Your son married into a family with money, and you saw an opportunity, and you took it. I heard you in Susan's kitchen, asking whether I would sign things over after the wedding. You have known this family for months, and already you were planning how to spend my money. At least you never pretended to love me. There's a strange honesty in that. Vivian said nothing. She was the only one of them who looked more calculating than ashamed, already working out what could be salvaged. Then I turned to Daniel. You married my granddaughter 18 hours ago. And last night at your own wedding, you stood guard while your bride and your mother reviewed a petition to strip an old woman of her home. You knew what you were marrying into. I suspect you helped plan it. You have a particular kind of smile, Daniel. I have seen it across a lot of negotiating tables. It is the smile of a man who has already decided to take something. Daniel held my gaze for a moment, then looked away. He did not bother to deny it. And then, finally, I turned to Claire. This was the part I had been dreading all night, because no matter what the photograph showed, she was still the granddaughter I had loved more than anyone in the world. And you, I said, and my voice did change then, just slightly, because I am only human. You sat at my kitchen table 8 months ago and asked me for help, and I gave it to you without a second thought. I gave you the wedding of your dreams. I would have given you everything in the end. You only had to wait. You only had to keep being the granddaughter who called me on Sundays, and one day all of it would have been yours freely with my blessing. I picked up the photograph and looked at it again, but you couldn't wait. In your own wedding dress, At the party I paid for, you were the one pointing at the page, not Susan, not Vivian. You were running it. That's what hurt the most, Claire. Not that they wanted my money. People will always want money. What hurt was learning that the granddaughter I trusted completely was the one holding the pen. Claire began to cry. And here is the thing about Claire, the thing that told me everything. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say she had been pressured or confused or talked into it. The first thing out of her mouth, through the tears, was a question. So there's really nothing left? Nothing at all? That was my answer. Even then, even caught, her first concern was the money. I felt the last thread of hope I had been holding finally let go, and strangely, it was a relief. I no longer had to wonder. There is plenty left, I said quietly. Just none of it for you. The room erupted then. Susan started crying and saying my name over and over. Daniel stood up and demanded to see the documents, asked whether any of this was even legal, threatened to call his own lawyer. Vivian told him to sit down and be quiet, which was the smartest thing anyone in that room said all afternoon. Claire just sat there, the tears running, asking again and again whether there was any way to fix it. I let them go on for a minute. Then I stood up, and something about a small old woman rising to her feet quieted them all. Here is what is going to happen, I said. You are going to leave my house. You can file your petition if you like, but Gerald has prepared a complete file with these photographs, the timeline, Susan's call, my doctor's note, and a video recorded last night proving I was of perfect sound mind when I protected myself. The moment you file, that file goes to the court. Every guest who saw a sweet, confused grandmother last night will instead see a family that planned this for months. You will not win. You will only humiliate yourselves. I walked to the door and opened it. I am not going to call the police today, I said. Not because you don't deserve it, but because I am tired and because losing everything you came here to steal is a better punishment than anything a court would give you. You will spend the rest of your lives knowing you had a fortune within reach, and you lost it because you couldn't wait, and because you were stupid enough to do it in front of a camera. They filed out slowly. Susan tried to touch my arm on the way past, and I stepped back. Vivian left without a word. Daniel left angry. And Claire stopped in the doorway, looked at me with wet eyes, and said, Grandma, please! Goodbye, Claire, I said, and I closed the door. Then I stood in my front hall, in my own house, in my own name, no longer, and I breathed. They never filed the petition. I think Vivian talked them out of it because Vivian was the only one among them who understood that the moment they walked into a courthouse, that file would end them. A guardianship case is public. The photographs would have come out. Susan's call to my lawyer would have come out. They would have spent money. They did not have to lose a case they could not win. And they would have done it in front of everyone they knew. So they did the cowardly thing, which was also the only smart thing. They went quiet. In the weeks that followed, the calls started. Susan called to apologize, then called again to explain, then called a third time to suggest that surely I didn't mean to cut my own daughter off entirely. I let those calls go to voicemail. Claire wrote me a long letter about how sorry she was, how she had been led astray, how she had not really understood what she was signing. I noticed that even her apology was an excuse. I did not write back. I want to tell you what I did with everything because that is the part of this story that matters most to me. Remember the new will and estate plan I had Gerald prepare that night? I had left the details for the end, and here they are. The bulk of my estate, when I am gone, will go to a foundation I established that same month. It funds two things. The first is scholarships for women starting their own businesses later in life, women in their 40s and 50s and 60s who are told they are too old to begin, the way I was told once. The second is legal aid for elderly people whose families try to take control of their lives and their money through exactly the kind of guardianship scheme that was attempted against me. I learned in the weeks after that what my family tried to do to me is done to thousands of older people every year by relatives who count on them being too trusting or too frightened to fight back. Most of them do not have a Gerald. Most of them do not have a photograph. So I decided that my money would help the ones who don't. But there was one more piece, and it is the part that gives this story its true ending. Marcus, the photographer, in the weeks after the wedding, I thought a great deal about that young man. He owed me nothing. I had paid him for a job, and he could have simply done it and gone home. Instead, when he saw something wrong, he had the courage to pull a stranger aside and show her a truth that destroyed her evening. Because, as he put it, if it were his grandmother, he would have wanted to know. That single act of decency from a person who had nothing to gain is the reason I am not, today, a ward of my own daughter, living on an allowance while they spent my money. I asked Marcus to come see me. He arrived nervous, I think worried that he had somehow caused trouble. I sat him down at the same kitchen table and I told him everything: what the photograph had revealed, what I had done that night, what his courage had saved me from. He was stunned. He said he had only done what anyone would do. I told him that was not true, that most people see something wrong and decide it is not their business, and that he had chosen differently, and that the choice had mattered more than he could know. Then I made him an offer. Marcus had told me, back at our first meeting, that photography was his passion, but that he could barely make a living at it, that he shot weddings to pay the bills and dreamed of opening his own studio someday. So I funded it, not as charity, as an investment with my name on it as a partner, because I believe in backing people who show character, and character is the rarest thing I know. He has a studio now. It is doing well. He sends me a card every few months, and he still remembers I take my coffee black. As for me, I am still in my house. I still walk my 3 miles every morning. I am 68 years old and I have learned very late a lesson I thought I already knew. The people who love you do not always love you. And the people who owe you nothing will sometimes be the ones who save you. I do not hear from Susan anymore. The last I knew, Claire's marriage to Daniel was not going well, which did not surprise me. Two people who will conspire against an old woman at their own wedding are not two people built to keep faith with each other. Vivian, I am told, has already moved on to other opportunities. I wish all of them exactly the lives they have earned. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. If I feel bad for cutting off my own family, my own granddaughter, I understand why they ask. We are taught that family forgives, that blood matters most, that an old woman should soften and let things go. But I think about that photograph. I think about a bride in her wedding dress at a party I paid for, pointing at a document designed to declare me unfit and take everything I built from a garage with my own two hands. I think about how close I came to spending my final years as a prisoner of the people who were supposed to love me simply because I was kind and trusting and old, and then I do not feel bad at all. They showed me one frame from my granddaughter's wedding, and by morning, I had canceled everything. It was the best decision I ever made, and I made it with a clear mind and a steady hand, exactly the way I have made every important decision in my life. They thought I was just the old woman writing the checks. They were wrong. If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.